Liar, my sister screamed in the courtroom. I placed a document in front of the judge and he said, "Lock the doors. No one leaves." Dad turned away, Mom trembled, and my sister froze. To them, I'm merely a homeless nobody. Can you even imagine coming home after 2 decades of serving your country, only to discover the people you loved most had systematically erased you? Not just from their lives, but from your own history? This isn't just about a house, folks. This is the gut-wrenching story of betrayal that threatened to shatter my very soul, and how I fought like hell to reclaim it. I stepped out of that taxi, full uniform on, duffel bag in hand, a heavy, silent drum beating in my chest after 25 long years away. I'd served my time, seen things, done things, and now, finally, I was home. Or so I thought. Before my boot even hit the porch, my sister Eleanor was already on the phone, her voice sharp, frantic. She was calling the cops. The late September air felt cool and thick, carrying the damp scent of leaves, but my skin burned. I paused at the edge of the wrought iron gate, the one that used to creak open with a familiar welcome. This was my house, the place I'd grown up in, woven into my very DNA. A security camera above buzzed, tilting slightly, almost like it recognized me. I waited for the click of the lock, for the sound of welcome. Nothing. The gate stayed shut. I pressed the intercom. A sharp buzz answered, then just silence. I tried again. "Eleanor." My voice cracked, rusty from disuse. "It's me, Clara." The front door swung open. Eleanor emerged, every inch the estate's gatekeeper in a tailored blazer and crisp slacks. Her phone was already at her ear, her eyes narrowed. "I'm calling the police," she spat. "There's someone trying to enter the property. Claims to be family." The shock literally punched the air from my lungs. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" She snapped back. "This isn't your home anymore, Clara. You've been gone for decades. Don't show up here dressed like that, expecting something." My grip tightened on the duffel bag, knuckles white. I just got discharged. I thought. God, I thought I'd see Mom. Maybe Dad. She scoffed. "You should have thought of them before disappearing for 25 years. We moved on. You're not in the will. You're not even on the deed." Her words hit harder than any combat report I'd ever filed. "I grew up in this house," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That tree." I pointed to the sycamore, its branches still scraping against the attic window. "I broke my arm climbing it. I bled into the carpet you probably replaced." Eleanor's jaw clenched. "You always made everything about you. You think a uniform earns you the right to just show up and expect a hero's welcome." A police cruiser pulled onto the street, its blue lights flashing, but no siren. My gut twisted. 2 officers stepped out. One was older, the other barely out of the academy. The older officer paused just for a second when he saw me. "Clara Vance?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Ma'am, you just got out. Pentagon Certified Lieutenant Colonel, Cyber Command." I swallowed hard. "This is my parents' house." The young officer glanced at Eleanor, who folded her arms triumphantly. "This property belongs to Eleanor Vance and Arthur Vance," he recited. "There's no legal record of Clara Vance holding ownership or rights of residence." My mouth opened, then closed. "Wait, Arthur Vance, my father? He's still here?" Eleanor's face remained carved from stone. "He moved in after selling the house we grew up in. This was Grandpa's. I renovated it. Legally." "I don't care about legal," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I care that it was home." The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, unless you have identification proving this is your residence, we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises." My hands trembled as I fumbled for my discharge papers, but even I knew they didn't matter here. I took a step back, then another, until my boots met the edge of the sidewalk. I didn't cry when they took my medals. I didn't cry when I coded in a hospital tent in Bahrain. But I cried now, because a place that shaped me refused to recognize me. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it with numb fingers. A message from Evelyn. My mother. "Clara. This is not betrayal. It's practicality. You never lived here. We did. And you're never around. Love. Mom." It hit harder than I expected. Like she was justifying theft with maternal indifference. I let the phone drop. Through the fog of my tears, I looked up past the window where a figure sat in the living room. My father. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even glance at me. I stood there, watching his silhouette, unmoving, refusing to look at me even once. I slept in my car that night, staring at the dark outline of the home that should have been mine. By morning, a for sale sign was already posted on the lawn. My eyes refused to close. Every creak of the wind, every flicker of the porch light, every memory clinging to that house, it kept me locked in place, my heart pounding with a rhythm I hadn't felt since my early deployments. That was supposed to be my safe place, my inheritance, my anchor. Now, it was a battleground. I pulled into a small cafe the next morning, blur-eyed and bone-tired. Sarah Jenkins was already there, pressed slacks, dark blazer, a sharp contrast to my faded uniform and the exhaustion etched into my face. We hadn't seen each other since undergrad, but she looked at me like no time had passed. That alone almost made me cry. "I saw the listing this morning," she said, skipping any greeting and flipped her tablet toward me. There it was, my home listed under Raven Holdings, LLC. I stared at the screen. Raven Holdings. She nodded grimly. And here's the kicker. 3 months ago, there was a property transfer recorded here. She passed over a printout. My name was on the seller line. Except that wasn't my signature, I said flatly, a cold pressure building behind my eyes. That's forged. I figured, Sarah said, pulling up another document. This one's from a local notary, witnessed and stamped by a guy who was under review last year for falsifying DMV affidavits. I'll subpoena him. I shook my head in disbelief. So they sold their house, and now they're laundering it through mine? Her brows arched. What? I took a breath. 3 months ago, they moved out of their house. Said it was time for a fresh start. They showed up here. Eleanor said it made more sense to consolidate family assets. My parents, Mom especially, made a big deal about how sentimental the old house was, but I didn't think they meant this house. Sarah nodded slowly. They probably used Raven Holdings as a buffer to avoid legal exposure. Whoever's behind that company. I bet your sister's husband is involved. My stomach turned. Marcus. Sarah looked grim. He works in international logistics, doesn't he? Yes. And they're storing supplies in the basement. I blinked. What? She pointed to a note in her file. City utilities show a spike in energy consumption at the property, like something's being refrigerated, but no permit for renovation or commercial usage has been filed. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Mom's email, the one from yesterday. I reread it. Asterisk Clara, this is not betrayal. It's practicality. Asterisk it hit harder than before, like she was justifying theft with maternal indifference. I need access to that house, I murmured. Not just to take it back. I want to know what's inside. Sarah hesitated. That could be dangerous, Clara. If they're using the house for something illegal. I'm not walking away. She nodded once. Then we'll start with a forensic document analyst. I'll file for an injunction to freeze the title. And Clara. What? You'll need to be careful. People who forge deeds and commit fraud aren't afraid to cross legal lines. The rest of the day blurred into intense calls and quiet meetings. I returned to my car late that evening, unsure whether I was more angry or numb. I parked down the block, determined to stay close to watch. The air was still warm, sticky, like Virginia hadn't accepted fall yet. I noticed a man standing across the street just after 1:45 a.m. He didn't look at me, but he lingered near the corner lamppost. When he left, I thought nothing of it until I saw the slip of paper wedged under my windshield wiper. It wasn't folded, just pressed flat, like a warning or a test. If you're the real Clara, meet me at Alley 7, 11 p.m. Come alone. I stared down the block at the winding path that led behind the old bakery. I had 10 minutes. I didn't hesitate. They said you were mentally unstable after combat, David whispered, his voice low, sharp with urgency. He was the neighbor who'd left the note, a mid-40s weathered face, former Marine turned mechanic. We stood in the shadow of an old street lamp at the edge of the alley behind the property. But I've seen the way your sister's husband brings men here at night. They say you're dangerous, Clara, he muttered. But if you ask me, Dangerous is what's going on in that building. My fingers curled around the edge of my jacket where a small recording device sat in an inner pocket. I scanned the alley. No security cameras, no eyes, but too quiet. What do you mean? I asked. I've seen men unloading crates from black vans, David explained. License plates vanish before they pull up. They don't stay long. Your sister's husband, Marcus, he's there every week, always with gloves on. Never a word to the neighbors. I remembered the last thing Marcus ever said to me, the day of my grandfather's funeral. Asterisk, you should stick to places with guns, Lieutenant. This isn't your terrain anymore. Asterisk, that smug tone, the contempt. Maybe he was right, but I knew how to watch, how to wait. That night, I returned to the alley alone, dressed in black, a camera clipped to my collar, recorder live. I crouched behind the half-burnt fence near the back lot. Midnight came with a low rumble of engines. 2 black trucks rolled in. No headlights. I held my breath. 4 men stepped out. I didn't recognize them. One was clearly armed. The other wore a cap, pulled low, and carried a clipboard. Then came Marcus. His gait was confident, relaxed, like this was just another Tuesday night. He didn't speak much, just pointed toward the rear door of the house. The group moved with practiced ease. Boxes unloaded, hands gloved, everything efficient. Sarah was right. This wasn't just squatting. This was organized. Then something unexpected. Marcus stepped inside the old warehouse. I crept closer, careful not to trigger the loose gravel underfoot. I positioned the small audio recorder near a cracked vent, its mic angled toward the loading area inside. Voices filtered through, muffled, but then one cut through sharper than the rest. If that officer girl finds out, sever the tie. No warning. I froze. The voice was familiar, gravelly, deliberate. My father. My throat tightened. I replayed it in my head just to be sure. That deep Virginia accent, that phrasing. I hadn't heard him speak directly to me in years. And now I heard him planning my erasure. I withdrew slowly, slipping behind the fence, hands shaking. I clutched the recording device like it might burn through my palm. Back in my car, I played the audio again, scrubbed it carefully, listening for every syllable. The voices were vague, except his. That one line. It played over and over in my head. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, I circled the block again and returned to the alley. But when I reached the vent, my recorder was gone. Someone had been there. Someone new. Panic flooded my gut, thick and metallic. My cover was slipping. I needed to move fast before the window slammed shut. I drove to a nearby diner to regroup, my heart hammering. I wasn't even halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. The message read, "You're playing with fire. I have your military psych report. Want to see what it says about you?" The text message was a cold threat. A few hours later, my father met me in a deserted parking lot. He didn't hug me. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just said, "You've changed, and not for the better." The wind picked up before he did. He stood next to his navy blue sedan, crisp jacket zipped to the collar, hat pulled low as if shielding himself from recognition. But it wasn't the rain he feared. It was me. I recognized the distance in his eyes, the stiffness in his posture. He'd practiced this meeting, prepared for it like a business transaction. Cold. Clean. Efficient. I stopped 2 steps away. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't flinch. "You came back different." I swallowed. "I served this country for 25 years. And in those 25 years, he countered, you became someone I don't recognize." The sentence hit like a rifle shot. I had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways, him saying he was proud, even quietly acknowledging the work I'd done. I had never imagined indifference. "I want the truth about the house," I said, my voice slow but sharp. "You knew what Grandpa left me. You witnessed the signing." He shifted his weight. "That document was outdated. Circumstances changed. Enough to forge my name? Enough to hide it under a shell company." I stepped closer. "I have audio." That got him. His jaw tensed, eyes narrowing, but still he wouldn't look directly at me. "I heard your voice. You said if I found out, you'd cut the tie." He finally turned toward me, his eyes colder than I remembered. "I meant what I said. We've tried to protect the family name. Your return jeopardizes everything we've built. Your sister is part of a respected enterprise. You live in a car. Because you sold my home. He didn't answer. Just glanced toward the black SUV parked across the lot. I'm not ashamed of what I've done, I said. But you're ashamed of me. That's what this is really about. He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs like brushing off dirt. You're not one of us anymore. The words didn't echo. They landed and stayed. He turned, walked to the SUV, and the driver stepped out to open the door. I recognized the man immediately, the same bald head, silver watch, always silent, who'd helped unload boxes at the warehouse. They drove off without another word. I stood alone in the rain. It started as a drizzle, then turned heavier, soaking through my sleeves, my collar, my soul. There was no reconciliation waiting in this story, just truth. And that was colder than anything I'd faced in uniform. I walked back to my car, my chest tight, throat burning with a silent argument I couldn't win. I didn't cry. But I did find an envelope wedged beneath my windshield wiper. It wasn't official, just a plain manila sleeve sealed with tape. I got in, turned on the cabin light, and opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a photocopy of my grandfather's original will. My name, the property address, all unaltered. The signature dates matched the copy I had stored in an encrypted archive from years ago. No transfer clause, no sale condition. It was airtight. A handwritten note was stapled to the top. Asterisk, I notarized this document that day. I know they falsified it later. J. Peterson, asterisk, I stared at it, my heart pounding. Proof. The first crack in their narrative. I scanned it again, then snapped a picture and texted it to Sarah with a single line. This changes everything. The deed was forged. But that was just the beginning. Marcus's name showed up in an old FBI case, sealed until now. I sat in the corner of my temporary rental apartment, bare mattress, one chair, no curtains, lit only by the blue glow of my laptop. Outside, the night wind rattled loose siding. Inside, my stomach churned as I stared at the report Alex had just sent over. I had reached out hours earlier, forwarding the original deed and the scanned will along with the corporate trail Sarah had begun unearthing. He'd responded almost instantly. I remember Raven Holdings, he wrote. Asterisk, we flagged them as a front company during a 2012 counterintel probe, laundering false, contracting dark money, but we were told to stand down. Case was sealed. Asterisk now, the name Marcus Thorne was staring back at me, listed under Consultant Logistics in the appendix of that same file. I froze. Eleanor had always insisted Marcus saved the family from collapse. He rebuilt Dad's business, she'd say. Without him, we'd have lost everything. No wonder she protected him so fiercely. But rebuild with what? Dirty money. I opened the next PDF from Sarah. Transaction records tied to the shell companies leasing the warehouse. She'd traced them to 3 entities, each registered in Nevada under different names, but the money flowed to one destination, Eleanor's private account. Over $500,000 transferred in the past 18 months. I clenched my jaw and pulled up the leasing contract. I found the name of the property manager. I didn't need to read past the first line. My father's signature, bold and slanted, was right there. Land supervisor. He had signed off on it. So, they were all in it. All 3 of them. I ran a background index on Raven Holdings through the private intel portal Alex still had access to. The tags were damning. Classified contractor cover, suspected financial funnel, domestic asset misappropriation. Alex pinged again. Asterisk, you sure you're ready for this? If you move, they'll hit back. Asterisk, I replied without hesitation. Asterisk, I'm not backing off. I'm not just fighting for a house. I'm fighting to expose what they've done and who they're still hurting. Asterisk, I called Sarah. She picked up immediately. I have the contractor names, the bank routing, the signed lease, everything links. And the forgery matches. My signature was copied from a tax return in 2017, notarized by a woman who hasn't been licensed since 2020. I already verified. Sarah was silent a moment. Then we file. Fraud, criminal conspiracy, real estate title tampering, possibly federal racketeering. If the Raven Holdings connection holds, it holds. For the first time since I'd returned, I felt grounded. Not angry. Not broken. Focused. They erased me, I said. But now I found them on paper, in crime files, in signatures. They forgot to hide. My inbox chimed. A leak. Subject: urgent. Asterisk, she's investigating. She started connecting the dots. Clean house before the 16th lockdown, the Eleanor accounts. The Vance girls persistent. Asterisk, it was an internal email sent between two Raven Holdings addresses. Someone had forwarded it anonymously. They knew. They were already trying to erase the trail again. I stood at the gate again, this time in uniform, decorated with honors. But beside me was someone more powerful than medals, my lawyer. Sarah adjusted the strap of her leather case as we waited at the counter inside Fairfax Town Hall. Sunlight poured through the high windows, but the tension between us and the property office clerk was thick as cement. The clerk tapped her keyboard, eyes darting across the screen. "This deed is active," she said, almost too casually. Sarah didn't flinch. "That's precisely why we're here. We're filing a petition for immediate injunction on all transfers based on compelling evidence of forgery and fraud." I slid forward the folder Sarah had prepared, detailed analysis of the signature inconsistencies, the timeline of the false notary, and the suspicious account trails. At the top of the stack sat the verified original deed from my grandfather's will. The woman's eyes widened. She looked at Sarah, then at me. "Lieutenant Colonel Vance," I said softly. "Retired. I grew up in that house." By noon, we had a stamped confirmation. The land office had enacted a temporary hold on all transactions related to the property pending further investigation. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. A line in the sand. The drive to the house felt surreal. This time, we didn't park across the street or lurk in shadows. We pulled straight into the driveway. Eleanor's Lexus was already there. Marcus's truck, too. Sarah adjusted her jacket, pulled out the official envelope with the injunction, and handed it to me. "Let's give it to her together." I rang the bell. Eleanor answered, her lips already curled into that polished, performative smile until she saw my uniform. Then she saw Sarah. The color drained from her face. "We're here to serve you with a court injunction," Sarah said crisply, handing over the envelope. "Effective immediately, any transfer, lease, or modification of the property is suspended. You've been notified." Eleanor's hands trembled as she took the papers. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" she hissed. Marcus appeared behind her, slow and deliberate. "You really want to go this route, Clara," he said, his voice like gravel soaked in oil. "You don't know who you're fighting." I met his gaze, calm, controlled. "I used to work internal investigations at the Pentagon," I said. "I've seen men like you. Watch them bluff, threaten, then fold." His eyes narrowed. For a flicker, just a breath, I saw it. Fear. Not of me, maybe, but of something unraveling. Eleanor sputtered. "You can't do this. You're not even the rightful owner." Sarah cut in. "That's what we intend to prove in court." Marcus stepped forward. "This is harassment. You're harassing my family." Sarah gave him a hard look. "And fraud is a felony." We turned and left. The slam of the door behind us was louder than I expected, like a final act in a play that had gone on too long. In the car, Sarah glanced over at me. "They'll hit back, Clara. Are you ready?" "They will strike back." "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her eyes sharp. What they didn't know was I had access to tools they couldn't even imagine. Digital forensics, chain of custody metadata, and a few friends who owed me favors. The soft hum of my laptop filled the silent apartment as I leaned over a second monitor, my eyes tracing digital breadcrumbs left behind by people who thought they were smarter than the system. The glow of the screen lit the stacks of documents on my kitchen counter, overlapping in an organized chaos only I could decipher. It was nearing midnight. I hadn't slept properly in days, but sleep didn't matter. Not when I was this close. I clicked into the secure Zoom room. Alex appeared first, tired eyes, Marine Corps cap still on despite the hour. Then Lena popped in. She'd always preferred anonymity, a blurred background, and her voice modulated just enough to avoid AI tracing. "I got your packet," Lena said without preamble. "Encrypted well, but let's see what the liars left behind. I uploaded a zip file of PDF screenshots and one particularly shady wire transfer receipt. Lena whistled. Someone's been busy laundering money. Follow the IP, I said. That's all I need. She started parsing headers, running scripts, her fingers tapping like a symphony of exposure. Meanwhile, Alex leaned closer to the camera. I ran that company name you sent, Tech Solutions. You're not going to like this. He uploaded a redacted report from a Defense Department internal archive. Back in 2016, Tech bid on a supply contract, camo gear, and radio parts. They submitted forged compliance reports. Case sealed when someone upstairs pulled strings. Let me guess, I said flatly. No conviction, no penalty. Correct. But guess whose name shows up on the board of directors? He paused. Marcus Thorne. I stared at the name. All this time, Eleanor said he was the one who kept the family stable. She never said how. Lena interrupted. I isolated a digital signature from that financial transfer you sent. The VPN they used isn't clean. Most amateurs assume they're safe, but there's a DNS leak. That IP traces back to a residential modem, Fairfax area, registered to Eleanor Vance. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. So, they're funneling money from the house. Exactly. And get this, Lena added, one of the purchase orders routed through Tech's system matches a lot number tied to a surveillance drone batch we flagged years ago during your deployment. You were still in the Gulf then, right? My mind flashed back. That case never resolved. Half the gear vanished after audit. Someone covered it. Now, it felt like the ghosts of my past were reaching through the timeline, converging right here, right now. I want a chain of evidence, I said. Every login, every IP, every transaction they touched. This isn't just fraud. It's military misappropriation. Alex nodded. I'll pull DoD procurement cross-references. This could trigger federal review if it hits the right ears. Lena's screen flickered. Her face sharpened with tension. Clara, she said carefully. Your inbox was accessed at 8:42 p.m. from an unfamiliar device. I froze. Are you saying I've been hacked? I'm saying someone's trying to cover their tracks and you just lit up their radar. They're scanning your location again. Someone breached your email tonight. Lena had warned me. The next day, a flimsy cease and desist letter came in a plain envelope. But I had already mailed my report to the office of the Inspector General. This letter, thin and desperate, screamed of their unraveling. It sat on my kitchen table next to a steaming mug of black coffee, its neatly typed return address, sterile and smug from Raven Holdings Legal Affairs. I didn't even bother opening it. Instead, I thought about the envelope I had dropped off yesterday morning, priority mail, certified, signed upon delivery. Inside were copies of bank transfers, falsified deeds, metadata chains, audio transcripts, and a sworn affidavit detailing how my identity had been used to secure access to restricted contracts. Each page was numbered, watermarked, and bound together by the one thing none of them had counted on, a soldier who knew how to build a case from the ground up. The Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Defense didn't move quickly, but when it moved, it thundered. Later that evening, I received the automated reply, Your report has been received and assigned a preliminary review officer. Follow-up will be communicated via a secure channel. I read the line 3 times, letting it settle into the marrow of my bones. No longer whispers and shadows. No longer secrets between family members. This was now federal. Sarah called as I finished scanning the reply. They'll want a full comparison of Eleanor's known income versus incoming wires. Can you get that from Lena? I already asked her, I said. She's pulling last year's IRS statements and cross-referencing them with flagged transfers from shell companies. We'll need a subpoena eventually. Let me worry about that, Sarah replied. Just make sure nothing happens to you in the meantime. I smiled grimly. They'd have to try harder than an envelope. But elsewhere, someone was unraveling. I didn't hear it firsthand, but I later found out from Sarah, who heard it from a courthouse clerk who had lunch with someone at the zoning office. Eleanor had lost it. Apparently, she found out about the federal submission within hours. Whether it was the bank's compliance alert or a panicked call from Marcus, she knew I'd gone over their heads, and she didn't take it well. By noon, Eleanor had shown up at Sarah's office, unannounced, uninvited, and unhinged. "You think this is going to help her?" she'd hissed. "She's going to drag us all down, including her own father." Sarah remained calm, professional. She handed Eleanor a copy of the cease and desist letter I had received and said quietly, "You might want to advise your counsel that intimidation of a federal whistleblower is a felony." Eleanor stormed out, but not before throwing one final threat over her shoulder. "This isn't over." No, I thought, sitting in my apartment, watching the rain beat against the window. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. That night, Sarah came over with 2 folders, bank summaries from Eleanor and Marcus. The figures were staggering. Eleanor's declared salary as a nonprofit coordinator didn't come close to matching the deposits. And Marcus? There were 3 transfers from a shell account linked to Maritech Solutions, all deposited the same week the forged deed was processed. I stared at the numbers, shaking my head. "They moved fast," I said. "They had a timeline." "This wasn't desperation. It was coordinated." "They underestimated you," Sarah said. I looked at her, calm but resolute. "They always have." The phone buzzed. A voicemail from an unknown number. I played it on speaker. It was Eleanor. Her voice shaky, uneven. "Clara, please, let's meet. Just talk. This doesn't have to go further. We're still family." I ended the message before it finished. "I'm not here to talk," I told Sarah. "I'm here to shut them down." Eleanor had once whispered to my mother, "If Clara blows this open, he'll be the first to go to her." They tried to delete me from the family tree, but I was adding their names to a federal inquiry. The elevator hummed as it climbed toward the 7th floor of the U.S. Attorney's office in Arlington. I stood beside Sarah, my reflection barely recognizable in the brushed metal doors, not because of my clothes. I was still in a muted blazer and slacks, but because of what I was carrying inside. For once, it wasn't a uniform or a badge. It was knowledge, leverage, evidence. We were led to a glass-walled conference room by a stone-faced paralegal. Inside, the federal prosecutor was already waiting, Daniel Hayes, Assistant U.S. Attorney for Northern Virginia. His handshake was firm, but not performative. His eyes didn't flinch when Sarah sat down the bulging folder of documents. "Miss Vance," he began. "Thank you for coming. We've reviewed the materials submitted to the Office of the Inspector General. We believe a formal criminal inquiry is warranted." Hearing it aloud gave the whole thing new weight. The forged deeds, the bank transfers, the surveillance footage, and most damning of all, the fraudulent contracts tied to Raven Holdings and Maritech, both traced back to Eleanor and Marcus. I spoke carefully, controlling my breathing like I had in hundreds of interrogations before. They used my discharge credentials to gain access to federal bidding processes. They used my grandfather's house as a discreet waypoint. They never imagined someone would come back to check. Sarah added, "We also have preliminary confirmation that Mr. Vance, Clara's father, served as a proxy on property transfers to mask conflicts of interest that may qualify as conspiracy to defraud." Hayes opened a leather binder. "Based on what we've received, we're issuing federal subpoenas for Marcus Thorne, Eleanor Vance, and Arthur Vance. They will be compelled to testify in a closed preliminary hearing 2 weeks from today." I leaned forward. "I want to be anonymous until then. No public disclosures, no leaks to media or local authorities. They've already tried to intimidate me." "We'll flag your testimony under protective status," Hayes said. "But be advised, once formal charges are filed, anonymity isn't guaranteed." "That's fine," I said. By then, I want to be the one speaking out loud. Outside the window, I could see the Potomac, placid and gray, the calm before the current shifted. That afternoon, I waited with Sarah in the lobby of Eleanor's nonprofit foundation. The subpoena was to be delivered in person. She didn't know we were watching from across the atrium. Eleanor walked in, brisk heels and a too-bright smile for the receptionist. It took less than a minute. A U.S. Marshal stepped forward, handed her the envelope, and spoke the words we'd waited weeks to hear. "You are being summoned under federal subpoena for alleged participation in conspiracy and fraud." The receptionist gasped. Phones froze in mid-scroll. Eleanor's smile shattered. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. She turned, eyes scanning the lobby. And for a moment, I thought she saw me, but she didn't. I was behind mirrored glass, watching the empire she built on silence begin to crumble. Later that night, Sarah and I stepped out of the federal building after finalizing the paperwork. The air smelled like the first hint of spring. Wet concrete, pollen, tension. I've rarely seen a case turn this fast, Sarah murmured. They know they're exposed. Good, I said. They should be afraid. As we reached the parking garage, I slowed. A black sedan sat idling across the street. Windows tinted, engine running, no license plate visible from this angle. Just long enough to be watching. Just long enough to make sure I noticed. The walls they stole from me were now silent witnesses in court. And the woman they called unstable, she was the one testifying. The courtroom was cold. Stark white lights overhead, pale walls, steel benches that hummed when I shifted. I stood behind the witness table, my right hand raised, the oath catching in my throat like sandpaper. I didn't shake. But I remembered the day my grandfather handed me the keys to the house. The day I came home to find my name erased. The night I heard my father's voice, masked in shadows, plotting behind my back. Now I stood here, not as the daughter who had been disowned, but as a decorated officer, a cybersecurity analyst with top-secret clearance history, and most importantly, a plaintiff backed by federal prosecution. The prosecutor began, "Miss Vance, please describe what was done to your property." I met his eyes, then shifted toward the bench. They forged my signature on a deed transferring ancestral property. They altered bank records, funneled money through offshore accounts disguised as nonprofit funds, and they used my military discharge credentials to apply for federal contracts they had no legal access to. He nodded. "Did you consent to any of this?" "No, sir." The evidence came in waves. A photograph of the deed with the falsified signature. A screen capture of the IP logs Lena had tracked to Eleanor's home network. Audio files with my father's voice, subdued but distinct, arranging late-night deliveries to the warehouse behind my house. And then came the financial documents, bank transfers from Raven Holdings to shell corporations in Eleanor's name. Another to Marcus's Maritech Solutions, amounts too large for helping the family. Eleanor sat stone still, her face pale beneath her mascara. Marcus leaned forward, jaw clenched, whispering urgently to his lawyer. My father didn't even blink. The defense tried. Marcus's attorney objected to the admissibility of surveillance footage not obtained through legal means. Sarah stepped in with a declaration signed by our digital expert, data chain of custody intact. No tampering. Timestamped. Eleanor's lawyer tried to spin the narrative. My client acted under the impression that Clara had relinquished claim to the house. This was a familial misunderstanding. I leaned into the microphone. A misunderstanding doesn't involve stolen credentials, falsified signatures, and the use of federal infrastructure for illegal bidding. The final nail came when the prosecutor held up a physical copy of the procurement contract, complete with my old clearance codes and Marcus's name on the submission. He looked like he might bolt. Then the prosecutor turned to my father. "Mr. Vance, can you explain the source of the $320,000 you transferred to Maritech?" Silence. He looked toward the floor, then toward Eleanor, then finally toward me. But I wasn't his daughter now. I was a federal witness with everything to lose and nothing left to protect. The prosecutor's voice was calm. "In your opinion, Miss Vance, does this constitute a deliberate conspiracy?" "Yes," I said. It wasn't just about a house. It was about power, control, and silencing someone they thought wouldn't come back. He nodded once, then turned to the judge. "In closing, Your Honor, the defendants did not simply defraud a veteran. They undermined the integrity of public trust, used federal systems for personal gain, and orchestrated a coordinated attempt to erase accountability. These are not family disputes. These are federal crimes." The courtroom exhaled. Somewhere behind me, pens scribbled on notepads. Reporters, finally allowed to witness the case, clicked their cameras. I could hear the clatter of keys, smell the ink from the printed exhibits. I felt every eye turn toward me as the judge recessed the hearing. I stood slowly, stepped down from the platform, and gathered my things. My palms were sweating. I told myself it was adrenaline, not grief. Outside, I moved through the crowd of photographers and questions, ignoring the flashes. Sarah stayed close. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Not until I reached the edge of the sidewalk and saw her. My mother, standing under a tree, hands clasped together like in prayer. Her mouth trembled, but no words came. Her eyes were red. She hadn't said a thing in years. Not one letter, not one call. But now she was here, and I, who had faced war zones and courts alike, found my hand trembling. My mother stood silently, her eyes red as my hand trembled. For the first time in weeks, every seat in the courtroom was filled. Not to watch me fail, but to hear the truth. The federal courthouse in Alexandria had never looked so full. Rows upon rows of observers sat in tense silence. Some in suits, some in uniform, and others with faces lined by years that mirrored mine. C-SPAN cameras were discreetly tucked in corners. I could feel every lens on me as I stepped to the front. I wore my uniform not just because I had earned it, but because it was the only armor I had left. My ribbons were real. My service was real. And today, I'd let that truth speak louder than any forged deed or whispered lie. "Miss Vance," the prosecutor began, "you may proceed with your full testimony for the court." I took a breath that felt like peeling off rusted chains. My name is Clara Vance. I served over 20 years in the Department of Defense's Cybersecurity Task Force. I held top-level clearance. I came home with honor, expecting only silence. Instead, I was erased. A murmur swept through the benches. My name was removed from my family's will, from their home, from their story. They forged signatures, laundered money, used my identity to access military contracts. They did it under my father's approval. They did it while calling me unstable, dangerous, irrelevant. Gasps now. The prosecutor played the audio file. Eleanor's voice crackled through the speakers. Asterisk, she's just an unemployed soldier clinging to medals that don't matter anymore. Asterisk, no one moved. One veteran near the back, a man in a faded navy jacket, shook his head slowly. Another seated beside him reached for her cane, jaw clenched. I turned to the judge, but I was speaking to everyone. We don't wear these uniforms for medals. We wear them because we believe in something larger than ourselves. I did not serve to return home and be treated like a threat or a burden or a lie. Someone clapped just once, but then others joined. Not everyone, not the ones in tailored blazers who probably golfed with people like Marcus, but enough. Enough to know I wasn't alone anymore. The judge lifted his hand. Silence resumed. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Eleanor sat frozen. Marcus's hand twitched over his tie. My father, stone-faced as always, stared past me. The judge leaned forward. Given the volume and substance of evidence submitted, this court will proceed to a full criminal trial 6 weeks from today. All motions to dismiss are denied. All current restraining orders and property freezes remain in effect. I exhaled just slightly. It wasn't over, but we were past denial, passed out. This was real now. Court recessed. I gathered my notes, stepped down from the stand, and caught the eye of that Navy vet on the back bench. He gave me a nod. Just that. But it said everything. I turned toward the hallway. Eleanor was already reaching into her handbag, fingers moving rapidly across her phone. She didn't look at me, but I saw it. She opened her photo app, scrolled through pictures of family dinners, holidays, smiling portraits from years past. She tapped one folder, then another. Eleanor was quietly deleting every photo of me from the family's social media accounts. They tried to destroy every trace of me, but I had archived everything, even their crimes. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, the soft hum of my encrypted laptop filling the silence. The external drive rested beside me like a time bomb, one they'd forgotten I even owned. My fingers trembled slightly as I plugged it in. Not from fear, but from the raw restraint of what I was about to unleash. File directory loaded. The first folder was dated 7 years ago, labeled Legacy. Inside were scans of contracts, correspondence, grainy surveillance stills from years past. They'd once been my insurance policy. Now they were a loaded gun. Eleanor must have assumed she had deleted everything. She always had a knack for arrogance, but she hadn't counted on me backing up every drive I ever used. She hadn't counted on military-grade recovery software. And she sure as hell hadn't counted on me coming back with a legal team. I pinged Lena with a file batch, encrypted, timestamped. Within seconds, she responded. Asterisk got it. Matching metadata confirms creation from Eleanor's home IP. This is gold. Asterisk next, I called Sarah. I'm coming in, I said. And I'm not alone. I'm bringing ghosts. She didn't ask questions. Sarah never did when my voice sounded like that. At the firm's downtown office, Sarah waited in the boardroom, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp. I slid the drive across the table like a chess piece. Contracts processed through shell vendors, I said, opening the file. All routed through Maritech and Raven Holdings. Look, this one's a falsified procurement agreement for drone parts. Same model we used to inspect in Kuwait. Sarah's brows furrowed. You're telling me they reused defense documents to mask fake orders? Not just reused, modified. Then ran payment cycles through dummy vendors using addresses that match my father's commercial listings from the 90s. They resurrected his old businesses on paper. Eleanor managed the routing. Marcus did the laundering. My name was used to legitimize it. She opened her laptop and uploaded the files into our official court submission. I'll add these to the affidavit. The court will want a certified backup. No problem, I said, pulling out a second drive. I have 3. A notification pinged. Lena again. Asterisk for your information, Marcus tried to scrub his metadata trail 2 days ago, but he didn't know we had the backup from your last OS scan. He's cooked. Asterisk, I forwarded the message to Sarah, who let out a dry chuckle. Eleanor and Marcus thought deleting files would save them. They underestimated a woman trained to extract secrets from nation-states. I watched her file the documents into the federal repository one by one. Every forged receipt, every IP record, every manipulated digital signature was now admissible. But the moment that made me freeze wasn't technical. It was personal. One folder deep inside the archive, untouched, titled Vance Family Originals. My heart skipped. I clicked. Among receipts and email logs, a video loaded, grainy but clear. It was my grandfather in his study the day he signed the original will. His voice unshaken. Asterisk, this house goes to Clara. She's the one who never left. Not in spirit. I trust her to keep it safe. Asterisk, the document was visible on the desk, unaltered, signed, dated. The same one I had shown Sarah weeks ago, but now with a recorded confirmation. We both stared at the screen. That's your hammer, Sarah whispered. I nodded. Time to swing. Just then my phone buzzed. An anonymous number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the subject line, internal email. Forwarded copy. I opened it, asterisk from, undisclosed@ravenka.net to, redacted subject, urgent message. If Clara opens her mouth, we don't just lose assets, we lose our freedom. We need to move fast before the hearing date changes. Asterisk, I passed the phone to Sarah. They're panicking, she said, reading. Let them, I replied. Her phone buzzed next. She answered and listened in silence, her eyes narrowing. Understood. We'll prepare accordingly. She hung up, looked me dead in the eyes. That was the federal prosecutor's office. Based on this new evidence and risk of flight, they're pushing the trial forward. I leaned back in the chair, adrenaline humming through my limbs. It was happening. The timeline was collapsing in our favor. The cliff edge we'd been dancing along had just shifted beneath their feet. And this time, I wasn't the one about to fall. They had their secrets, their manipulation, and each other. But I had something more dangerous, the truth under oath. Marcus Thorne walked out of the Raven Holdings headquarters for the last time under a swarm of flashing cameras. The press release had gone out just minutes before. Due to pending federal investigation, Marcus Thorne has been placed on indefinite leave pending internal review. The company had cut him loose the second the indictment list leaked to media contacts. No one wanted their name tied to federal conspiracy. At the same time, Eleanor Vance was across town in a lawyer's office that smelled like old mahogany and desperation. She was alone. Her posture wasn't sharp anymore. Her voice cracked as she tried to frame her statement. I was manipulated by my husband and father, she told the assistant district attorney. I didn't know the details. I was following family orders. It was a gamble and a cheap one. But desperation makes people throw each other under the bus faster than the ink dries on a subpoena. Back at Sarah's office, I watched footage unfold on the news. Marcus's stoic face surrounded by bodyguards. Eleanor ducking under her coat at the courthouse steps. But the one that made me pause was the image of my father. He was standing inside what used to be the family home, his hands trembling as he shouted into a phone. The video, taken by a local reporter, captured him slamming his fist against a glass coffee table, shattering it into jagged pieces. The clip played over and over. Family patriarch loses composure amid scandal, the Chiron read. Public narratives are turning, Sarah said, not looking up from her stack of documents. I know, I murmured. They're unraveling faster than I expected. My phone buzzed. A courier message. I opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter. The stationery was delicate, slightly yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was careful and old-fashioned. Asterisk Clara, I've watched from the sidelines far too long. Your mother and I were close once. I knew about the house. I knew your name was on the will. I also knew she let them change it. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Mrs. Henderson. Asterisk Mrs. Henderson had been a friend of my mother's, one of those women who hosted brunches, who always asked how I was doing, but never really listened. And yet now, here she was, reaching across years of silence to say, I knew, and I stayed quiet, and I regret it. I folded the letter slowly. Truth has a strange way of surfacing, I said, placing it beside the growing pile of evidence. That evening, the federal courthouse held another closed session. This time, the judge was ready. The court finds sufficient cause to freeze the financial assets of Eleanor Vance, Marcus Thorne, and Arthur Vance, she announced. Effective immediately, these accounts will be placed under investigative seal and subject to audit. The moment was sterile, procedural, and devastating. Everything they had built by fraud was now under scrutiny. Their liquidity evaporated in minutes. Homes, cars, stocks, college funds gone. The empire built on my silence was collapsing brick by forged brick. I stood outside the courthouse steps as the wind picked up. The sky was bruised with the color of approaching night. Reporters crowded near the gates. Some called my name, but I ignored them. Then my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. Clara. The voice was shaky, unsure, familiar. My mother. She said nothing else, just my name. And in that brief silence, I could hear everything she didn't say. Regret. Fear. Maybe even guilt. I held the phone to my ear and didn't speak. Let her sit in it. Let her feel, for the first time, what it was like to be alone on the other end. My mother had called, but I hadn't answered. Later, outside the courthouse, he approached me. Please, Clara, my father begged. Don't ruin us. I looked him in the eyes and said, you did that on your own. It was late afternoon, the light stretching long shadows across the courthouse steps. I just finished reviewing the final briefing with Sarah when I saw him standing near the marble column, not in a suit, but in his old wool coat. His tie was crooked. His face was pale. He looked smaller than I remembered. I didn't slow my steps until I was nearly past him, but then he spoke, low and hoarse. Clara. I turned. Mr. Vance, I said flatly. His face crumpled at the title. Don't do that. I'm your father. You lost the right to that word the day you erased me from everything, I said. He stepped closer. I didn't know it would go this far. You didn't care, I corrected. That's what you mean. I made mistakes, he said, hands open, pleading. We were trying to protect the family. By forging documents? Stealing my house? Laundering money through a company that used my clearance? That's protection. He looked away, jaw tight. I was scared. No, you were proud, I said. You couldn't stand that your daughter came back in uniform instead of a dress, holding medals instead of wedding invitations. His eyes flickered. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. What wasn't fair was you not coming to my retirement ceremony. Remember that? When I called and invited you. He stayed silent. You said, and I quote, that's not something to brag about. It's just a job. 25 years of service, and you reduced it to nothing. He swallowed hard. Eleanor was going through a rough time then. Eleanor was always going through something, I said, bitterness creeping in. And you always had time for her, for Marcus, but never for me. He didn't argue. Instead, he lowered his voice. You've already humiliated us. The indictments, the hearings, the news coverage. Please, Clara, don't let it go further. I laughed, short and sharp. You think this is about humiliation? It'll destroy our name, he whispered. Our name? I echoed. You erased my name from the will, from the family records, from everything. I panicked, he said. I let Eleanor talk me into things. You signed. You knew. He didn't answer. After a moment, he reached out his hand, trembling as it hovered near mine. For a second, I saw the man who once held mine on the walk to school, who once helped fix my bike chain. But then I remembered the empty seat at my officer commissioning, the silence after my deployments, the house I came home to only to be thrown out like a stranger. I didn't take his hand. Behind him, I saw her, my mother, standing near the edge of the colonnade. She hadn't approached, but she watched. Her arms were folded tight across her chest, her eyes rimmed red. I don't hate you, I told him. But I can't forgive you on behalf of justice. He flinched. And justice, I said, is coming whether you ask for mercy or not. He turned away then, shoulders hunched. I walked past him without looking back. As I reached the bottom of the steps, I felt someone beside me. My mother. She didn't meet my eyes, but her voice broke the silence. If I had made different choices, maybe it wouldn't hurt this much. I looked at her for a long second, then kept walking. My mother stepped closer and whispered, if I had chosen differently, maybe it wouldn't hurt this much. She hadn't changed. But I had. They took everything, but I walked out of that courtroom with my name, my honor, and justice on my side. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. For all the weeks of hearings, motions, and cross-examinations, today felt still. Final. There was no shouting, no dramatics, just the gavel, the judge's even tone, and the weight of consequences being carved into history. I sat beside Sarah, our shoulders barely touching. Across the aisle were Eleanor, Marcus, and my father, lined up in a row like defendants in a photo I never imagined I'd see. Eleanor's face was pale, jaw locked. Marcus's eyes flickered nervously. My father looked old, not from age, but from erosion. The slow crumbling of arrogance under truth. The judge's voice echoed, Eleanor Vance, 6 years in federal custody. Marcus Thorne, 8 years. Arthur Vance, 10 years with no parole. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. Then silence again. No cheers, no applause. I didn't smile. I just nodded once to Sarah, who closed her folder and placed a hand gently over mine. It wasn't victory I felt. It was completion. Outside, the press swarmed, but the first people I saw were the veterans, men and women in faded uniforms. Some leaning on canes or wheelchairs, others with ribbons pinned proudly to worn jackets. One of them, a man with a prosthetic leg and soft, steady eyes, stepped forward and extended his hand. Colonel Vance, he said. I shook it. We're not forgotten, I told him. He nodded. Not while people like you are still standing. Flashes from the cameras lit up my peripheral vision. A reporter shouted, Do you hate them now? After all this. I looked toward the sky for a moment. The sun had broken through the morning fog. Warmth touched my face. I don't carry hate, I said. I carry clarity. I walked down the steps slowly, Sarah beside me. Alex was waiting by the car and Lena sent a thumbs up from across the lot. They were more than allies. They were the family I chose. I didn't return to the house. I didn't need it anymore. What I wanted was never brick and wood. It was the right to belong to my own story. Weeks later, I stood inside the Defense Service Library, staring at the wall of dedication. It was made of dark granite, etched with names of those who had contributed to national security in extraordinary ways. I had walked past it once as a young cadet, whispering promises under my breath. Back then it felt like a monument for others, untouchable. But now, there it was. Colonel Clara Vance, Cyber Command, OA 2020 to 2023. Valor, service, integrity. No family portrait ever meant as much. No inheritance ever compared. As I stood there, my reflection blurry in the polished stone, I felt tears sting my eyes. But I didn't cry. I stood tall. They stripped me of my name, my home, and my dignity, believing no one would ever believe a so-called broken soldier. But in the end, it was their lies that unraveled under oath, and my truth that stood unshaken. Justice doesn't arrive in noise or vengeance. It arrives in the quiet courage of someone who refuses to stay erased. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Some battles are fought in silence, in courtrooms, and in the hearts of those who have been betrayed. And sometimes, the quietest warrior is the one who wins the loudest. So, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to fight to reclaim your own truth? Share your thoughts below. I'm genuinely curious to hear what you all think.